Before the Fire, a story from 6 million years ago. A tale from the age before humans, when the land was still deciding what we would become. In the golden light of a long-forgotten dawn, before the world knew humans, there was only survival. Africa was a wild and breathing continent, rich with rivers that had no names and winds that carried no language. Tall grasses moved like whispers across the savanna, and in the shadows beneath ancient acacia trees, something stirred, something not quite ape, not yet human. Her name, if she had one, is lost. But scientists call her Sahelanthropus cadensis. She walked the edge between forest and grassland. Sometimes upright, sometimes knuckle-walking. Her skull small, her brain just beginning to dream. Yet in her eyes, wide, alert and watchful, the story of us was already starting. She was not alone. Others like her lived in scattered groups. They knew the warmth of sun on stone, the taste of wild figs, the sting of ant bites, and the strange sound crocodiles made just before the river took someone. Their tools were not tools yet. Just sharp stones that felt good in the hand. They did not speak, but they pointed. They touched. They learned. They watched the termites rise in columns, and they poked into the mounds with sticks. This was knowledge, primitive, precious, passed on in silence. They did not build homes, but they made shelter from branches, leaves, and shadows. They did not hunt large prey, but scavenged what the vultures missed. Their predators were many, lions, hyenas, snakes, leopards, and time itself. And yet they endured. 6 million years ago, the earth was not a place for the weak. But something different had begun in these creatures, something small and fragile, like fire in wet wood. A spark. The slow rise of awareness. They looked up more than others. They remembered the safe trees. They began to choose. And through every drought, every storm, every loss, they stayed. Generation after generation, their legs grew stronger for walking. Their hands more skilled for holding. Their instincts deeper for remembering. From these beings came others, Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and finally, us. But before we were us, we were them. Not kings of the world. Not creators of fire. Just shadows in the grass, breathing with the earth, surviving beside the beasts. They had no names, but their lives were the beginning of every story told beside a fire. Even this one. Before the Fire Part 2, the ones who stayed upright. A few million years later, the world shifts, and so do we. Time moved like wind over stone, slow but certain. Forest retreated. Grasslands grew wide. The air was hotter now, drier. Rivers carved new paths. The old ones dried and cracked. And those who stayed had to change. From the bones of Sahelanthropus came others. Smaller jaws. Straighter spines. Hands that could hold not just branches but ideas. They walked more upright now. Not all the time. But more than before. Their name would be given much, much later, Australopithecus afarensis. They were short, barely a meter tall. Their arms still long. Their eyes still wild. But they were watching. They watched the vultures spiral in the sky, a signal that meat might lie beneath. They followed. They waited. They scavenged. They picked marrow from old bones, licked what they could, and remembered where the lions fed. They watched the termites, still. Poked them out. Sucked them up. Easy protein. Still good. They carried babies. Carried sticks. Carried memories. They did not speak. But they made noise, soft hoots, throat clicks, breath sounds that meant, come, or stay, or danger. These were not words. But they were not silence either. They learned to break stones. Not by design, at first. Just the accident of a fall, a rock cracking on another, revealing a sharp edge. But they remembered the sharpness. They began to copy the break. Not tools, yet. Just something close. They would become the ones who almost invented fire. Not yet. Not in this time. But the spark was closer. At night, they huddled in trees, gripping each other. In the dark, they dreamed. Of what? We'll never know. But something stirred. A shape. A shadow. The first fear of death. Or the first image of a mother's face. The beginnings of meaning. And the world kept turning. The saber-toothed cats roared in the valleys. Massive crocodiles ruled the rivers. Elephants with 4 tusks wandered the lockshores. The rains came and left without warning. But still, they stayed. Small. Upright. Watching. Learning. One step closer to us. To be continued. Next, fire in the bones, when the mind awoke, as we moved toward Homo habilis and the first signs of planning, toolmaking, and ancestral intention. Before the fire, Part 3 Fire in the Bones. The rise of Homo habilis, the first of our kind to shape the world with thought. They were still small. Still living close to the earth, still wary of claws and silence. But something had changed. Subtle, invisible to the predators and the trees, but real. Their hands were different. More precise. Stronger in some ways, gentler in others. The thumbs could press against the fingers with purpose. And now, they weren't just using stones, they were shaping them. These were the ones we call Homo habilis, handy man. Not because they built houses. Not because they made fire. But because they could imagine something within a rock, a blade, a tool, a shape. Their tools were simple. Black circle a flake chipped from a larger stone. Black circle a sharp edge made for cutting meat. Black circle a rounded hammerstone to break bone or crush roots. But this was invention. Not instinct. Not imitation. Intention. They hunted sometimes, but more often they scavenged. They followed the vultures still, watched hyenas leave scraps, and used their tools to tear open what other jaws had left behind. They discovered marrow. Soft, rich, hidden in the center of bones. The food of the future. Their brains grew. Not quickly. Not drastically. But enough. Enough to remember where to find the sharp stones. Enough to teach a child how to strike one rock against another. Enough to hesitate before danger, to think, not just react. And perhaps, somewhere in this time, 1,000,000 sparks before fire, they saw lightning strike a dry tree. They watched it burn. They did not yet know how to control it. But they remembered. They were watching it now, not just fearing it. A seed was planted. And in the bones of Homo habilis, something else had taken root. Brain planning. Footprints movement with purpose. Creation. Books memory. They still slept in trees. They still fled from lions. They still had no words. But now, the world was beginning to bend, slowly, quietly, toward them. And from them would come new beings, Homo erectus, taller, stronger, firemakers, wanderers of continents. The next step. The journey was far from over. But now, we were walking with minds open. To be continued. Next, the firemakers, how Homo erectus lit the dark. Would you like that next chapter? Or I can format this as a script for narration, or break it into parts for short-form storytelling video episodes. Before the fire, Part 3 Extended Fire in the Bones, the Rise of Homo habilis. Millions of years ago, when the world was wild and untamed, a new kind of creature emerged from the shadows of the ancient African forests and savannas. They were small, no taller than a modern child, but their minds were beginning to stretch in ways that would shape the future of life on Earth. These were the Homo habilis, the handy man. They were the first to hold stones not just as found objects, but as tools, shaped by their own hands to cut, scrape, and break. It was not magic, but the slow work of trial, error, and observation. Imagine a morning in the savannah. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of earth and dry grass. A group of Homo habilis awakens beneath the dense canopy of thorny acacia and baobab trees. The sky above is streaked with soft pinks and blues, the sun still low. A young female carefully picks up a stone. It is rough, jagged, but she begins to chip at its edges with another rock. A sharp flake breaks away, revealing a keen edge perfect for slicing. This flake will help her mother cut into the tough skin of a scavenged antelope carcass, a meal left behind by lions and hyenas. The discovery of marrow, soft, nutrient-rich, hidden deep inside bones, changes everything. No longer relying solely on fruit and insects, these early humans are beginning to access new food sources, richer and more sustaining. But survival is not easy. Predators stalk the same plains, saber-toothed cats lurk in tall grass, giant crocodiles lie in wait beneath riverbanks, packs of hyenas roam, ready to contest every scrap of food. Homo habilis live on the edge of danger. They sleep in trees, clutching branches tightly as nighttime predators roam below. They watch the stars and listen for the rustling of leaves, learning to read the world's subtle signals. Their social bonds grow stronger. Though they have no language as we know it, their soft calls and gestures form the first threads of communication. A grunt here, a pointing finger there, these are the roots of cooperation and community. They share food. They protect one another. The young learn by watching and copying the elders. This passing of knowledge is the first step in culture. Their minds continue to evolve. They recognize patterns. They remember places, the termite mounds that promise a quick meal, the safe caves where storms can be weathered, the paths to water during dry seasons. They begin to think ahead. One day, perhaps, a lightning strike sets a tree ablaze. The fire burns fiercely, lighting the dark. Homo habilis watches, fearful, fascinated. They cannot yet make fire themselves, but the image of fire is etched into their minds. This awareness sets the stage for the next chapter. For soon, taller and stronger descendants will rise. Homo erectus will walk farther, hunt smarter, and dare to bring light into the night. But for now, the handy man holds their stone tool tightly and before the fire, part for the firemakers, rise of Homo erectus. The sun blazed high over the African savanna, painting the grasses gold and the sky a deep endless blue. It was a hotter, drier world now, forests had given way to open plains, rivers ran slower, and the animals that lived here had grown larger and fiercer. This was a world that demanded new skills, new strength, and new ideas. From the small, clever Homo habilis emerged their descendants, taller, stronger, and more daring, Homo erectus, the upright man. Standing well over 1.5 meters tall, with longer legs built for endurance, they were made to walk long distances across the vast African wilderness. They were explorers. Not content to stay in one place, they followed herds across the grasslands, learning to track animals, to know the land, to survive where others could not. Their hands were skilled, crafting sharper tools from flint, shaping axes and scrapers with purpose and care. And then, the fire. Somewhere in this ancient time, they tamed the flame. The exact moment is lost in mystery, a spark from a lightning strike, a fire caught from burning trees, or perhaps a stone struck just right to ignite a flint. Whatever the cause, Homo erectus learned to carry and tend fire, holding it like a precious gift. Fire changed everything. It brought warmth during cold nights, light in the dark, and protection from prowling predators. It transformed food, cooking meat to make it easier to chew and digest, unlocking nutrients that helped brains grow even larger. Around these fires, something new blossomed. The flickering flames became a gathering place, for sharing food, stories, and safety. Early humans sat close, their shadows dancing on cave walls, the first flickers of community glowing in their eyes. They also began to build. Not houses, but simple shelters, rock overhangs, windbreaks made from branches, places to rest that were safer and warmer than trees. They learned to cooperate in hunting, chasing large game together, using tools and fire to drive animals into traps or exhaustion. Their social bonds deepened. Groups grew larger, more complex. They shared knowledge, how to make tools, how to find water, where to avoid danger. Their brains continued to expand. With this growth came new thoughts, perhaps the beginnings of language, more sophisticated planning, and even a sense of the future. They were no longer just reacting to the world. They were beginning to shape it. But life was still fragile. Droughts, predators, injuries, and accidents took many. The world was harsh, and survival never guaranteed. Yet, Homo erectus endured, traveled, and adapted, crossing into new lands beyond Africa, reaching into Asia and Europe. They were the first to be truly human in many ways. Not just walking upright, but thinking forward, controlling fire, and creating tools with clear purpose. The ancestors who carried the flame of life through the dark night, Lee. Before the Fire, Part 5. The Dawn of Homo sapiens, the Birth of Story and Spirit. After hundreds of thousands of years, the world changed again. From the long line of ancestors who had walked upright, tamed fire, and crafted tools, a new species appeared, Homo sapiens, the wise man. They were taller and slimmer, with lighter bones and larger brains shaped differently from those who came before. But what truly set them apart was something invisible, a spark of creativity and curiosity that would soon echo through time. The world they entered was vast and diverse. Forests, savannas, deserts, and mountains stretched before them. They adapted quickly, learning to use every resource, from the prickly cactus to the swift antelope, from river fish to tree fruits. Language blossomed. No longer just simple sounds or gestures, their voices carried complex meaning. They spoke of places seen and unseen, dangers and dreams. Around the fire, stories were born. Tales of hunts, of the spirits in the sky, of ancestors who walked before. This was the beginning of culture. Songs, rituals, and art, the first expressions of what it meant to be human. They painted. Deep inside caves, their hands traced images of animals, hunters, and strange symbols. Colors made from earth and charcoal brought these visions to life. These paintings were more than decoration, they were a connection to something greater, a way to understand the world and their place in it. They crafted new tools. Not just sharp stones, but needles to sew animal skins into clothing, spears balanced for throwing, and hooks for fishing. Their ingenuity allowed them to survive in cold climates and harsh terrains. Community grew. Bands of humans shared food, knowledge, and protection. Elders taught the young, and the young dreamed of new possibilities. They cared for the sick and buried their dead, honoring the cycle of life. And then, they traveled. From Africa, Homo sapiens moved across continents, crossing deserts, mountains, and oceans. They met other humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, sharing stories and genes. They adapted to new worlds, always moving forward. The greatest change was within. With imagination came innovation, empathy, and wonder. The first rituals, the first music, the first dance. A mind able to dream, to ask why, and to create meaning beyond survival. Reflection. The story of Homo sapiens is the story of becoming artists, storytellers, dreamers, and builders of worlds. It is the beginning of all that we are today. Before the Fire, Part 6. Stories by the Fire, the heartbeat of humanity. When night fell across the vast landscapes, the cold crept in and the dangers of darkness surrounded the small bands of Homo sapiens. But they carried a precious gift, fire. Around the crackling flames, families gathered. The firelight flickered on faces young and old, casting shadows that danced like spirits on the cave walls. This was more than warmth and safety. It was a place of gathering, a sacred space where stories were born and told, stories of the hunt, of the stars above, of the animals that roamed the earth, and of the ancestors who walked before. The storyteller, often an elder with wise eyes and steady voice, began. Long ago, when the world was new, the great baobab tree stretched its arms to the sky. The children listened, wide-eyed, as the tale wove through the night, teaching lessons about courage, kindness, and the laws of the wild. Stories served many purposes. Teaching how to track animals, where to find water, which plants heal, and which to avoid. Remembering the journeys of ancestors, the origins of the tribe, the meaning of seasons and stars. Connecting, building bonds between people, creating a shared identity and trust. Imagining, exploring the mysteries of life, death, and the spirit world. As fires burned, songs rose, melodies mimicking bird calls, rhythms beating like the pounding hooves of the gazelle. Dance followed, feet pounding earth in celebration and ritual. Art joined storytelling. Hands pressed pigments onto stone, creating lasting images. These were the first libraries, not written words, but pictures and symbols that carried meaning across generations. This oral tradition was the heartbeat of humanity. Long before letters and books, it was stories that preserved knowledge and hope. Through them, the past lived and the future was dreamed. The journey continues. As Homo sapiens traveled beyond Africa, these stories evolved. Blending with new landscapes, peoples, and ideas. They became the foundation of every culture and every civilization that followed. Reflection. Around a fire, under a star-studded sky, the earliest humans found their voice, a voice that still speaks to us today, reminding us of our shared beginnings and the power of stories to light the darkest night. The site offers more questions than answers. Trade, however, is something we can trace. The people of Great Zimbabwe were not isolated. Through rivers and trails that snaked through the savanna and over distant ridges, they connected with a far-reaching trade network. Glass beads from India, porcelain from China, and coins from Arabia have all been found in the ruins. These were not conquerors or colonizers, but traders. Quietly, efficiently, they built their wealth on gold and cattle. Gold dust was gathered from riverbeds and dug from shallow pits with wooden tools. Though primitive by today's standards, the miners were skilled. The gold was carried, bit by bit, along trade routes to the east coast, eventually reaching the Swahili city-states like Kilwa, and then sailing across the Indian Ocean. From there, it passed from hand to hand, flowing invisibly into the vaults of merchants and kings far removed from the source. All the while, Great Zimbabwe grew. Not explosively, but like sediment collecting in a river, steadily and without hurry. By the 14th century, it may have housed up to 20,000 people. Some lived on the hill, others below, spread across the valley in clusters of huts and stone-walled enclosures. It was not a city in the modern sense, no paved roads or market plazas, but it had order and rhythm. Grain was stored in clay bins. Tools were forged from iron. Songs and stories were passed along evening fires. And then, as slowly as it had risen, the city began to fade. There was no war, no fire, no cataclysm. Instead, the decline came from soil and silence. Overgrazing may have exhausted the surrounding land. Deforestation for firewood and construction strained the environment. Some suggest a gradual shift in trade routes pulled wealth elsewhere. Others believe drought and famine quietly pushed the people to scatter. By the time Portuguese explorers heard tales of a stone city far inland, Great Zimbabwe was already largely abandoned. The jungle began to creep in. Baboons and vines found new homes in the empty spaces between stone walls. And for centuries, the site lay in uneasy stillness, misattributed, misunderstood, and often ignored. Today, it is still here, sitting quietly beneath the sun, visited by curious travelers and circled by crows. The walls have no voice, but if you listen closely, the stones seem to breathe with memory. And yet one question hums through the silence. What does it mean when a civilization leaves no written record, only architecture and artifacts?